I'm Kevin Doyle, Head of News at INM, and I've been asked by Newsbrands Ireland to speak about the newspaper industry and what it needs for public service journalism to survive. In the eyes of some, newspapers have already become a relic of the past, something from the good old days when we had time to sit and read, whereas nowadays we commute and we consume rather than sitting and reading. And journalism has become content. And one of the first things I would like the Commission to do is to think about that for a second, not to get lost down this road of content, because content is something to be sold, whereas the future of media depends on journalism, which is the work that we do. But let's start with the good news. The imminent death of good old-fashioned journalism is fake news, or at least it's been greatly exaggerated. There is still journalism happening every day in this country, and it's of a high standard and it serves the public well. But the question that the Commission has to consider is whether journalism should merely survive or whether it should actively thrive. And amid all the hot takes about how media is dying, Irish newsrooms are still working every day to expose injustices, highlight hypocrisy, challenge those in power to do better. Here's a few examples. I'm sure over the course of the Commission's work that you'll hear plenty of negative stories about how the industry is struggling. And it is. But it's important to remember that journalism is still happening every day, and it's having an impact regardless of whether you read it in tabloid or broadsheet, print or online. And I often wonder how local and national radio stations, and indeed social media, what they would talk about if they didn't have newspapers to help them set the agenda. You would have seen a figure in that clip of 72% of adults who consume news either digitally or in print every week. So it's a myth that the media is dying. The numbers are bigger than they ever were. The people are still reading it. But what many don't realise is that real journalism has a cost. The migration to online has actually seen most publishers manage to grow and diversify their audience dramatically. But the problem is that no app, no flashy website, no podcast, no hard paywall, no soft paywall, no leaky paywall has come anywhere close to matching the success of advertising and revenue in print. So the problem is not so much relevance, it's revenue. If I could ask you to take one thing away from what I have to say, it's that a strong media has to stand on its own 2 feet. Everything we decide in a newsroom now comes back to one big question: budget. But the problem is that journalism is a funny business, and many of the best assignments I've been on made absolutely no sense on accountancy paper, but made great sense in a newspaper. If we weren't doing this in this weird remote COVID world, I'd probably have time to explain to you how I ended up inside an Egyptian pyramid with a bunch of hippies while reporting on Brexit, or talk about eating breakfast on a beach in Gaza while child soldiers trained in front of me. The opportunity to do that type of valuable journalism is shrinking every day. The best way to reach diverse audiences, be they young, old, rich, poor, Irish or new Irish, is to write about the issues that affect them, even if they appear niche. Take the Irish Times recent series, which explored the reality of 2 decades of direct provision. It was strong public service journalism that took time and editorial resources. Of course, it's not all about exposing massive injustices. We have to be able to highlight the day-to-day ones as well. The tents currently outside the shuttered Debenhams up on Henry Street. The recent campaign by The Sun to get better working conditions for our defence forces. The stories of children with additional needs who are still this week, not back in school. One of the best ways to understand and reach an audience is to be out there among them in the community. A few years ago, all the main media outlets would have had correspondents in every corner of this country. Now, sitting on a news desk, it can be hard to find a freelance journalist in many counties. And without them, without a vibrant media industry, who's going to cover the county councils, the courts? Who's going to go out to the community games or the Special Olympics? Who's going to write about the hero in the Tidy Towns Committee? Would you trust Google and Facebook to expose national and international scandals and simultaneously report on the best of Irish? No, is the short answer. Newspapers have to earn the trust of our readers. We live and die by our credibility. That's why we hire fact checkers. Journalists, that's what they are. We have editors who have to make decisions and stand by them. There is a press council. We have in-house lawyers who make sure we stay within civil and criminal law. And all that work and all that resource is then piggybacked on by the social and search platforms who can make all the revenue because of the way the digital advertising model is structured. I think we're actually very lucky to have quite a diverse media in Ireland, and it's one that's not afraid to call each other out from time to time. But we're not immune either from what has happened in the United Kingdom and the United States recently. Donald Trump didn't create the concept of distrust in the media. What he did was capitalise on a pre-existing distrust that was already there. At the same time, he did show people that all content is not created equally. He opened the eyes of people to the power of words and the power of disinformation. Last week, we saw Joe Biden declare that democracy has prevailed. And without getting into an ivory tower or getting too high and mighty, I do think that in some ways, journalism is a little bit like democracy. It's not perfect, and it's not something that can simply be achieved. Journalism has great days, and don't get me wrong, it also has awful days. Days of big embarrassment where we get it wrong. But in the round, it must prevail. So when you ask what public service journalism will look like in the future, I would start by saying we're fighting to preserve what we do now. As journalists, we love nothing more than a good gate. Votegate, Golfgate, the FAI scandal, they're just some of the big stories that journalists have brought you in recent times. Then we have well-researched and verified information on the COVID-19 crisis, presented in a way that not just educates, but also engages. This is what Irish journalists are trying to do every single day, against a backdrop of abuse, conspiracy theories, draconian defamation laws, and a fundamental imbalance between internet providers and publishers. To keep doing it, we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet. And if we can achieve that much, then the potential for more public service journalism grows, and with it, so too does the engagement.